Jess with Emotional Fire Academy here today to talk about emotional first aid, the basics. Now, subscribe to my channel if you are a highly sensitive person ready to up-level in life. And who am I? I am an emotion coach. I am a master NLP practitioner, and I am a former firefighter. And I help people do just that. I help highly sensitive people up-level in life and have a much more exciting, passionate, awesome experience as a highly sensitive person. So, let's dive right in. Emotional first aid, the basics. Now, this is the start of a video series that I plan on making over the next few weeks about certain topics, and I think emotional first aid is a really important thing to start practicing. Now, let's answer the primary questions. What, when, where, how, why, who? What is emotional first aid? Other coaches do talk about it. This is my understanding of it. I have not read the book Emotional First Aid, so this is my own opinions, thoughts, beliefs, and I hope you enjoy them and understand where I'm coming from on this. So what is emotional first aid? It's a series of tools we can use to help ourselves deal with our problems. And just like physical first aid, there's actually two parts, which I don't think people are aware of the second part. You know, you're dealing with the immediate threat. So putting pressure on a wound, elevating something over your head, putting ice on it. But there's also the second part is the cognitive processing, where you're sitting there thinking, I will never do that again. I will never run my hand along a splintered fence. I will never, grab a hot pan. And so the cognitive processing part is just kind of happens automatically. Obviously, that's how we learn, right? The pain conditions us not to do something again. With emotional pain, it's a little bit different because sometimes we will make rules and conditions and generalizations for ourselves that then we internalize them, but then they don't serve us at another point. Right? Say we had a horrible experience public speaking and now we don't ever want to public speak again, but we become an entrepreneur and we need to do that. And so part of emotional first aid is not only dealing with problems, the immediate threat of an emotional pain, so putting pressure on it, dealing with it, soothing yourself in the moment, but also handling the second aspect, which is the cognitive processing part, so that we don't accumulate these thoughts and beliefs that won't serve us. Because our mind wants to protect us, just like our body wants to protect us. And so, so who is this great for? I think especially emotional first aid is good for highly sensitive people because there's an inherent victimization in our label, in our condition, right? I mean, they tell us, oh, you get easily overwhelmed. Maybe the fact is we don't actually get more or less overwhelmed than any other member of the general public. That's just the belief that has been instilled in us. And there is a natural victimhood in that. Like, oh, I'm just going to get frazzled, or oh, I just can't handle this because I'm a highly sensitive person. So I think emotional first aid is really important for HSP people. It has definitely helped me in life and helped make my life experience better and better every day. And the more I practice it, the better and better it becomes. So it will help you too, even if you're not highly sensitive. When do we use it? Obviously, we can use it in emergency emotional situations, emotional emergencies, or just uncomfortable situations where we want to shift something about ourselves. Obviously, we start with ourselves before we can help somebody else, right? Put our own oxygen mask on first. And so the why, how, and where I'm going to explain now. Now, I do recommend if you haven't seen it, check out my reacting versus responding video. I'll put the link above. I first described this concept in that video, and so go back and check that out after you finish watching this. So my view of reality is the 0 point versus 1 point reality. So 0 point is everything, all possibilities. It's infinite timelines, infinite dimensions, infinite, and that even comes down to the amount, the kind of thoughts we're having, the quality of our thoughts. We could be having better thoughts. That's a choice for us. The infinite number of choices, experiences, timelines available to us outside of ourselves And so that's 0 point reality. That's like infinite reality. Our 1 point reality is kind of, I see it as like a giant mass of soap bubbles. And that is kind of floating on top of 0 point reality. It almost acts like a lens. We filter, 0 point reality through all these bubbles that we've created. These bubbles are our concepts, right? When we're growing as humans, we learn concepts. Everything is a concept. So anything from your feelings, your emotions, your memories, your inner child, that's a concept. Your inner child is actually as much a concept as the concept of apple. The apple and inner child, they're both concepts. Everything we learn is a concept. And so it's an internal representation to us. It's a bunch of thoughts, feelings, expressions. These are all and they're all kind of equal, and they're all kind of intertwined and attached to each other and sharing their bubbly walls with each other. So it's also personas we play, right? When we feel like a victim versus the bad guy or the bad girl or the rescuer. It's memories, it's beliefs, it's conclusions we've drawn about ourselves and other people. It's judgments, it's rules that we have about ourselves that maybe our parents taught us, but then we uphold that rule. We're like, everyone should act this way. It's interpretations of 0 point reality. And so this giant mass of bubbles that we're kind of experiencing, it's our inner experience. It's everything that we're feeling, sensing, that we're these internal representations that we then filter our life experience through, and that's where we mostly exist. We can't exist outside of it, our 0 point reality. I think it's funny when people tell you to meditate, that's actually what you're doing. You're just spending time in 0 point reality. You're just stepping outside of this, closing your eyes, trying not to have thoughts, just trying to exist in 0 point reality where it's infinite. And you're not identifying with all of this. Because our self-concept is this 1 point reality. We kind of put this boundary around it because we're like, this is us. This is me. This is me. If there was no boundary, right, that's kind of what happens to these spiritual masters that are like yogis that can do amazing stuff, or that hero energy that I talk about when you do amazing stuff and you just kind of lift a car or do something crazy, amazing and bend physics or space-time or whatever. You're stepping outside of your self-concept. And so, space and time also, by the way, is a concept. My concept of time, my concept of space is another bubble in this, because do we really ever know if our concept of time matches somebody else's concept of time? Like how we all experience time is different. But anyway, I'm going to make a video about that. So our 1 point reality is our self-concept. This is all of these bubbles are our self-concept. And so when we practice emotional first aid, we practice developing inner authority. Because how much control you think you have over this, what's inside of your boundaries of your self-concept, is your inner authority. Now, I used to think I had no control over my inner authority or my self-concept. I used to think the thoughts that I think they just happen to me. My feelings happen to me. My experience of life happens to me. I have no control. Now, that is a very disempowering thought. That, again, that's a concept, and that bubble is taking control over all the other bubbles. That's kind of a hierarchical concept. Like, I don't have any control over any of this. Imagine if you popped that bubble and started taking inner authority. Inner authority is my concept that I have control over what is in here. I can shift it, I can shape it, I can mold it, I can pop the bubble, I can merge two bubbles, I can take control over this to then have a better life experience. And that has exactly been my actual experience with life, is when I started believing that is what happened in my life. I realized that emotions could be controlled. I realized that thoughts can be shifted and beliefs about myself can be shifted. So emotional first aid helps us to take control, to gain inner authority over ourselves. Because when we practice first aid on ourselves, we're going into these bubbles. We're going into the bubbles that hurt or feel pain and dealing with them. Dealing with them in the immediate sense, but also shifting the actual belief about ourselves that we're holding that is causing this emotional pain to happen, to recur over and over again. So inner authority, I think, is really important for highly sensitive people. It has totally shifted my life. Completely changed my life. So I know it will do that for you too. And so it's amazing when we do shift these bubbles, because our actual experience of life, right? Our interpretation of what happens, is from all of this self-concept. And so two people can have the same experience. They can literally sit through the exact same experience and interpret it completely differently. And that's because they both have different amalgamations of these bubbles and that are filtering that information. One person takes that event as something that adds to them and makes their life richer. Another person takes that event and makes it something that is horrible and cripples them. And so events themselves are neutral. It's what is in our bubbles that makes it positive or negative. And so if you're having a lot of negative reactions to life, you have some bubbles in there that need emotional first aid. They need emotional first aid. And the more and more we practice emotional first aid, the more inner authority we gain, the more control we feel over this domain, and the better experience we have in life. Period. Because we're interpreting life in a better way. We're having a more gentle and positive experience with the things outside of us. Right? Because they're just, so much is happening outside of us. We're only taking in a tiny, tiny portion, and that's based on what our bubbles say and think and believe. So, yeah. So all of these things about ourselves that we're believing, and conclusions, the judgments, your inner child, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of this is contained within your self-concept. So, and I just want to point out just a brief philosophy of emotional first aid and dig a little deeper into it. So part of our resistance to negative emotion, the resistance itself adds to the pain. And so often when we're told how to deal with negative emotion, actually feeling it and sitting with it is the best course of action. Now, as opposed to burying it down, we don't want to bury it down, because if we do that, we're taking that energy from that emotion, that information, stuffing it down, and then creating a hair trigger for it to pop up next time when we're not anticipating it. We also don't want to practice expressing it in almost a exaggerated way. So people who are like, when you're angry, go hit a pillow, I would not recommend that, because when you're conditioning your body to not only, okay, when I feel angry, I'm going to have this physical, expression of it. You're actually practicing and conditioning your mind and body to go back into that emotion, because there's then a payoff, because you feel really good, right? You get this powerful feeling when you pound that pillow, and so your body's like, yeah, this kind of is nice. So you're actually conditioning yourself to be a more angry person. If you're experiencing an emotion you really just want to deal with and not have recurring in your life, the best thing to do is to actually sit with it, to actually allow it to be, to sit with it, to experience it. And that's actually the fastest way for it to pass. It's the most effective way. It kind of it comes up, it burns off completely. There's no residual, because you don't want those residual, kind of stuffing it down, resisting it at all. You want it to allow itself to be, because strong emotion is information. It's telling you, when you look deeper by practicing emotional first aid, you find the bubble that's really inflamed, that's like hurting really bad. You find it, and then with your inner authority of like, I can change this, knowing, believing, I can change this, I can make this different. You then prevent that going into these conditioned cycles where then you have to go hit a pillow, or you have to stuff it down or compartmentalize the emotion. You actually, it's like a very dynamic process of like, it comes up, you deal with it in the most like mature and way. You sit with it, you experience it, and then you learn from it each time instead of going into cyclical patterns or conditioning yourself. So emotional first aid is essentially freedom. It's liberating. It's liberating yourself from persistent, recurring negative emotions. And then starting to break patterns because what we experience in our outer world, our outer lives, is a reflection of what's happening inside of us. And so the patterns outside will then dramatically shift. When you take that inner authority and claim domain over all this stuff in your one point reality, your outside reality is going to shift dramatically because you're showing up in a different way. You're filtering in a different way. You're interpreting in a different way. And so it's going to be huge, massive shifts. Your relationships with people will be better. This is definitely what I experienced. So, and then, and this is often when we hear, so within, or as within, so without, or as so within, as without. But the concept that, who we are inside is reflected out in the world to us. And it's this mirroring, right? And it's a feedback loop. So when you change this, you can go into that feedback loop, change inside, change the bubbles. 0 point reality, not only you'll interpret it differently, but it will actually start to shift and other options become available to you. Other choices, other options, right? You're kind of breaking free of the same old patterns. And, yeah, so those are the basics of emotional first aid. I hope you've gotten kind of an idea of what emotional first aid is. It's just the process of calming yourself in the moment and then going into the cognitive processing of that emotion, getting the information, and then using it wisely. So I hope you tune into the upcoming videos. I'm going to be going over some really interesting topics, things like time. Time is interesting because it's one of your concepts in here, your concept of time. And I have spoken about this briefly in the career video about getting into flow states, expanding and collapsing time, because that is a concept, just like Apple, just like your inner child, just like your emotions. It's all a concept. They're all concepts that we learn. Time is a concept, space is a concept. So time, I want to touch on abandonment. I want to touch on fear and anxiety. So tune in for those videos. They'll be upcoming in the next few weeks. And thanks for watching. I hope you have an awesome day. Bye.